Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Glad you could spend a little bit of your day with us. We've got a great show straight ahead for you. And beginning our broadcast, when you're an ag producer, the bottom line is always at the front of your mind. But what do we do to keep our farms profitable in the long term? Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh has more on this story.
In the ever-changing world of agriculture, it can be difficult to plan ahead. Dwayne Beck, manager of the Dakota Lakes Research Farm in South Dakota, says that in order to move forward, we must first look back.
Yeah, it's really more of a look at where we've been in agriculture. We've only really been growing crops for 10 or 11,000 years and on purpose. Before that, we were hunter-gatherers and things. And why have we gotten to where we are? Because we've got to figure out where we're going. If we keep trying to do what we're doing now, it just isn't going well. A lot of it from an ecosystem standpoint and economic standpoint. I mean, one of the little tidbits is Washington and Jefferson and Hamilton were exchanging letters in the late 1700s saying if we don't do something to better care for our soils in the eastern seaboard, we'll be forced to move westward to find soils that aren't degraded. The Louisiana Purchase. You know, it's just like, oh, well, okay, we don't have to fix our problem because we got more land out here. And we're kind of out of land now. We just keep kind of throwing Band-Aids on and hoping that the patient will live, and maybe we need to go back and say, what do we need to do?
In order to start the healing process, Dwayne says we need to get to the root of the problem and start asking, what happens now?
Well, the big one is ecosystem degradation. The soils, and whenever man comes in and starts farming, the soils and the water systems get all screwed up and we start having droughts and flooding, and that's because we've degraded soils. And that's not just here. I mean, that's been all over the world. And it's more of a philosophical thing. Not that I have answers. I have questions. Like, do we really want to do this? And how much energy do we use to do this? And what happens when the energy goes away? Or you know, half the corn produced right now in the Midwest goes to ethanol. What happens in 25 years if we have electric cars and we don't burn ethanol? See, there's some of those like, oh gee, now what?
While the questions still remain unanswered, Dwayne has started working on his own solutions at the research farm, including growing his own fuel.
A native prairie would be our guide. And so what we're trying to do is not export stuff. The native prairie didn't really export stuff, and it didn't have to import stuff. So we're trying to close the circle in terms of our farming operations, in terms of energy, water, nutrient cycling, water cycling, energy capture. And so making our own oil is one of those. Now I can sell that as human edible oil also, canola and flax, or I can burn it if I need to. If I can get rid of having to burn it and have a solar-powered tractor, that'd be great too.
And Dwayne believes that by learning from the past, we'll find the answers we seek by rethinking the questions entirely.
What that tells us about where we should possibly be going, it may mean totally reevaluating some of our concepts.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. The Dakota Lakes Research Farm is completely owned and operated by farmers and often works in conjunction with South Dakota State University. We've got more on the Market Journal website. Time for markets now, and Dr. Scott Brown is our analyst this week. He's the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the University of Missouri's College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources. And there's lots of uncertainty in the cattle markets right now, and Scott is here to fill us in on what we know. Scott, thanks for being here today.
You bet, Troy.
And we're going to start off by talking about the coronavirus outbreak, and cattle producers want to know what impact this is going to have on beef demand. And perhaps one thing we're seeing is a change in wholesale beef prices and choice boxed beef cutout values. Is this a reflection of the uncertainty in the market?
You know, Troy, I think there's a combination of things going on when you look at the choice box beef price. We've been running $15 to $20, $100 below year-ago levels so far this year. And I think part of that could certainly be a demand story that we're talking about. But I like to remind us that we shouldn't forget that cattle weights are up, we're producing more beef. If you look year-to-date, beef production's up 6%. So I say it's more than just demand. And in fact, when we start thinking about coronavirus and the issues, to me, we haven't seen a real income hit yet. We've seen the stock market be ultra volatile of late, but in terms of less money in the pockets, I think that's yet to play out. I think those that are suggesting weaker demand because of a slowdown in the economy, if that slowdown in the economy occurs, that will be a correct assessment. But we're way too early to really get a true sense of what the demand drag could be, both domestically and internationally.
So in terms of export demand, is it one of those things where you see beef impacted here, or is it harder to tell when you combine it with issues that we already have, like ASF or the new trade agreements, or what's going on with the stock market? Any insight on that?
Yeah, so I think when you look at the export side, you backed me up prior to coronavirus. It was all about, we got USMCA to the finish line, we got a US-Japan agreement completed, and a phase one China deal. All of those had to be a lift to exports. You add ASF into that mix as well, and I go Chinese consumers looking for all of the alternatives, protein sources that they can find. It seemed to me that was all going to be good for the beef side. And then all of a sudden, coronavirus slowed all that down. You look at the monthly trade data we got out for January, and it's all still positive now. Much of that was pre any real serious coronavirus issues. But it just reminds me that cuts in tariffs that we see in agreements that we got with Japan, all that to me certainly set us up for greater exports going forward. With ports shut down in China, I think that's been, or not operating at full capacity, that's been one of the downsides. But figuring out where all of this ends up in terms of global economic downturn, it probably creates a situation where we're going to be a little less positive about trade out of the United States in meat products this year.
Sure. And cattle futures taking a hit as well. Do you have any update there?
Yeah, I sure wish I would have known in early January to tell folks to lock in prices. Hindsight being 2020, we've seen a $20 decline in fed cattle prices, 15 or so in feeder cattle futures as well. I think it has, again, a lot to do with the uncertainty in markets, but I remind us supply side has been important in this as well, and I think sometimes we've missed that piece of the story, that weights are higher and we're producing more beef tonnage than we did a year ago. But I think these futures markets are going to continue to be bearish until we learn more, which is likely weeks in front of us, about ultimately what the coronavirus does in the United States.
And then also we've got the monthly cattle on feed report coming out next week. Anything we need to be watching for here?
Well, so the last thing we need is some negative, more negative on the supply side of more cattle placed on feed than we anticipated. I see some numbers out that suggest to me we've brought a lot of calves out of Mexico in as we've started 2020. I'm really just looking for placement numbers out of this next report and really where we set relative to a year ago. We started the year with fewer cattle and calves in inventories for the first time in quite a while. It's just going to take us a while for that to translate through to ultimately less feeder cattle supplies coming to feed yards. But we need less supplies just given what's happening on the demand side. So we'll pay attention to that cattle on feed report for that kind of, well, what are we going to get here 6 months down the road in terms of fed cattle ready slaughter numbers?
Sure, and it seems like the key word right now is uncertainty, so maybe this final question is fairly important today. Any other marketing or risk management tips that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, so I'd sure tell folks to be careful today with how they manage risk management. And I say that from the standpoint of, I don't want to get one side locked in, and I say one side, I don't want to necessarily get that output price locked in without thinking about what I'm doing on the input side. because I think we got volatility happening in all these ag markets. So I wouldn't want to leave feed unhedged, if you will, and only have cattle hedged. You got to think about how that whole mix fits, because I don't think we're done. You know, when we look at stock market that, you know, one day is up significantly and the next day we retrace all of that. Futures markets have been doing the same thing. Yesterday, cattle futures were up pretty strong. Today, not so much. I just want folks to realize, think about the whole suite of risk management that you want to do. Will say there's risk still both ways. Even though we've seen futures markets that have been moving lower for cattle here since the start of the year, I don't think we want to close by saying couldn't be more downside risk in those markets. Knowing what your cost of production is in terms of using cattle futures, I think is important. You sure don't want to lock in a loss at this point, but I might like to let some others have some risk if I can lock in some reasonable returns. Tough to do today, but if these markets were to rally, we'd want to think about how to take advantage of that.
All right, all good things to keep in mind. Dr. Scott Brown with the University of Missouri, we appreciate it, and good talking to you today.
Troy, thanks a lot.
Next week, we'll be joined by Darren Fessler from Lakefront Futures. Al Dutcher is here now with our weather forecast. Al, how are we shaping up over the next few days?
Well, Troy, we have seen some active weather this last week, and we're expecting, unfortunately, what we're going through right now, some more active weather as we go through this next week. I have very little confidence in what these model projections are showing, and if they give this forecast, what we've seen over this last week is a consistent daily change in how the upper air trough in the western United States is going to be handled as we go through this period. But what is certain is that we are undergoing some snow right now in western Nebraska. We expect that will lift out of the region as we go through the day. And then the real question is when does the next storm system come in? And we'll get to that as we go to the upper air models. And the first thing we'll show your attention to out in the west, here's that big upper air trough expected to move into our region as we go to this next week. But we have a southwest flow aloft. At the surface, we have a low of the Texas Panhandle throwing moisture up over the cooler air to our north. That's leading to, unfortunately, some snowfall. Now, it does look like this is rain, but actually, Jeff, is a little bit too warm, but this is actually snowfall projected, and it will weaken as it moves toward the east. And by tomorrow, we see that trough digging. We start to see some ridging, bringing much warmer air into the region, potentially moving back up to near normal temperatures. Another surface low down the Texas Panhandle. That main primary precipitation will remain to the south and east of us, more to our north. That low basically sits off the western California coast and slowly tries to make it into the desert southwest. So we have a low over central Nevada and high pressure to our north trying to slide in with low pressure over the Texas Panhandle. We're going to get the moisture surge from the south. We got the northern stream giving us some snow. We're kind of caught here in between Nebraska, so we may escape this without any significant moisture. By Tuesday, that upper low moves a little closer to us. We start to see a low forming in the southeastern portions of Wyoming. We start to see some moisture to our south spreading toward the east, but it doesn't look like it's going to make it toward the north, at least initially, until this upper air low starts to make a little bit more movement toward our region. On Wednesday, we start to see some energy shooting up toward the southern Rocky Mountains, and low pressure firmly starts to develop in southeastern Colorado. Classic case where we start to see moisture evacuation toward the north, and we start to see that occurring in Texas on Wednesday. By Thursday, now the energy comes out far enough where we can start to lift this moisture straight toward the north, and we get low pressure systems ejecting out of that low pressure system, the upper atmosphere over Texas. That will bring a big steady increase of moisture into our region. We'll start to see thunderstorm development across the southern plains, snowfall accumulations to the northwestern part of the state, and heavier to moderate rains across southern Nebraska. And by Friday, the wave starts to open up and pushes that first piece of energy toward the east. But because of the big fetch of moisture to the north, we're still going to be dealing with significant widespread heavy precipitation across most of the western and central Corn Belt. Heavier snows toward our north. More importantly, you'll notice that there's some precipitation on the southwest side. That is expected to start to move in as we go into late next week into the following week. And behind it, it looks like we might start to get into some drier weather. Looking a little bit further out, we see the cold air in place with that upper air low trying to slowly pivot into our region. This might be overdone in terms of the cold, especially with more of that energy staying to the south of us for a little bit longer. But overall, most likely going to see some cooler conditions as we go from next week to the following Tuesday in terms of precipitation. With that storm ejecting out, the heaviest of the moisture should be from the southern Mississippi River Valley up into the Ohio River Valley. There is a secondary area of above normal precipitation located for southwest Nebraska in through eastern Colorado. That's associated with a second system coming out late next weekend. So overall, a very wet pattern, Troy, and we do look for some signs of warmer and drier conditions, particularly as we get toward the end of the month.
Thanks, Al. Next up, last month was a big one for Nebraska Extension. Between the hundreds who attended the Women in Ag Conference and the start of the 2020 TAPS competition, there's lots of new information for the state's producers. And if you haven't attended one of these events before, Market Journal's Bill Dodd is here to show you what you're missing out on. Bill?
Thanks, Troy. I had a great time getting out and seeing what these events were all about. Now first, we've got the Women in Ag Conference. This event covers the 5 major areas of agricultural risk management. And those are production, market, financial, human, and legal risk. Now on a personal note, my wife is an ag producer, and this is a conference that she and her mother typically attend. Now a couple of years ago, Shana suggested that there was a workshop that would have been perfect for me to attend, titled The Farmer's Wife. Now, while I never got specifics on the workshop, in all honesty, I wish I could have been there for that. That particular workshop probably would have given me some better insight into the challenges she faces on a daily basis in her profession. Now, the point being, this conference features a gambit of workshops and presentations on topics ranging from the best dietary practices for new mother cattle to the expanding role social media is playing in agriculture. In short, there was definitely something there for everyone, including the men who attended. For 34 years, Nebraska Extension's Women in Agriculture Conference has been educating and uplifting women involved in various aspects of Nebraska's agricultural industry. This year, there were several workshops and speakers that focused on improving farmers and ranchers to become better business partners and operators in a historically male-dominated field. This outcome is achieved in part by creating an environment that allows female operators to be more open with their questioning and concerns.
And I think it's such a popular event because women love the opportunity to network with one another and also gain business management skills related to their farms and ranches. A lot of times we see that women have questions and they're not always comfortable asking those questions in their family setting. So this is an opportunity for them to get those answers.
While the title of the conference is Women in Ag and caters to many of the challenges women face in the agricultural industry, the conference does allow and encourages male attendance. Now, this can be a very powerful opportunity for male producers to get a different perspective on many topics in the field.
The reality of that is that men have really, taken a much more visible, prominent role in terms of what we see, the face of agriculture. And I think one of the great things that's happening right now is that women are, we're seeing women's role in agriculture more, and that's that's giving women an opportunity. It's opening the door for them to be able to do some things that they weren't able to do in the past. And so for men to be able to participate in this conference in a way, what it does is it increases the visibility of women and their role in agriculture, what they're doing, and opens, gives, everybody opportunities that didn't exist in the past.
While I was hard-pressed to get a male perspective on the overall conference, I did bump into a couple who inherited a small acreage. I'd later asked the husband what his overall takeaway from the conference was, and he explained that issues were raised that he had never even thought about when it came to the female experience of working in agriculture.
Spending my professional life in education, it's a more gender equal. I'm not going to say it's equal, but it's more gender equal. One is used to working with both men and women, and so it was interesting to listen to the speakers, the keynote speaker, the luncheon speaker, because I had not thought just about how the rhythms of agriculture can create these kinds of maybe divides between the genders.
Now, before we move on, I want to take a second to thank John for taking the time to talk with me at the Women in Ag event, and most definitely to his wife Dawn for convincing him to. It's always fun meeting new people, and in the spirit of meeting new people, we set off to North Platte to find out what we would be seeing at this year's TAPS competition.
A little bit differently.
TAPS, or Testing Ag Performance Solutions, hasn't been around quite as long as the Women in Ag event. However, in the short time this competition's been around, it's gathered a good following. This competition helps engage professionals in all facets of the ag industry, from agriculturalists to scientists, as well as students and educators. Once involved in the competition, participants become part of a network focused on evolving profitability and input use efficiency in a low-risk environment, while simultaneously being provided access to a variety of technologies and strategies. The format has become so popular that other universities are beginning to take notice and start their own TAPS competitions. In fact, the TAPS program has become such an effective teaching tool that the program's creators are looking for alternatives to engage more people who can't take part in the physical competition.
For example, we're trying to create an electronic TAPS. Right now it's a real contest and lasts for a year. It's very difficult to take that long-term contest and put it into a classroom situation or into a short-term learning event. So the learning can continue and they can try some different things. Because TAPS is, one of the things we're trying to do is that we want farmers to use technology and things that they maybe are not as familiar with, and this gives a chance to familiarize yourself with it. But that also includes management style, that includes all kinds of decision-making, so it's the whole gamut of things. And so that's what's so cool about TAPS.
A lot of really hard work paying off at the end of February there. If you're interested in the TAPS competition, you can find out more information at taps.unl.edu. And be sure to keep your eye out for future extension events and educational opportunities, such as the Landlord-Tenant Cash Rent Workshop Series. Events will be held March 18th at the Nemaha County Fairgrounds 4-H building in Auburn, Nebraska from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. and from 2 to 5 p.m. at the Union Bank and Trust Company Room, Basement Community Room in Pawnee City. The workshop is free to attend, but registration is requested to ensure that enough materials are available. You can phone in to register for the event at 402-852-2970. Any updated information can be found at farm.unl.edu. Troy, that's what I've got my eye on this week. We'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Bill. Finally today, there's a piece of Nebraska in Portland, Oregon. And it's a piece that, by my estimation, weighs a couple thousand pounds. And this machine uses wheat grown in Nebraska to create new foods that feed the world and expand the export market. In 2016, representatives from the Nebraska Wheat Board helped in arranging a new home for a tortilla maker that was no longer being used by the University of Nebraska's Food Science Department. Its destination? Portland, Oregon, and the state's Wheat Marketing Center laboratory. The Wheat Marketing Center was formed in 1988 by 7 states, including Nebraska, and its lab services provide education and research to connect growers and customers. And that research includes hard red winter wheat, a crop that helps shape Nebraska's ag industry and is also a key export in the Pacific Northwest.
Hard red winter is the largest class of wheat being grown in the U.S., and it's utilized in so many different products across the spectrum, everything from steam bread to noodles to pan bread and other things. And we do research and training on many of these items. So we'll be showing hard red winter to customers throughout the year and encouraging them to use it as part of their blend in their products.
Partners of the WMC, like wheat breeders at UNL, send in wheat samples for the lab to test. Those results are later made into a report. For Wheat Innovation Manager Bon Lee, getting quality wheat from Nebraska and having equipment like the tortilla line is a game changer in developing consumer-friendly products.
The tortilla has been really a good fit for us, and we do the wheat and flour testing, and tortilla is one of the biggest or the growing market in the United States. So it became a boom, and that's when we got started with the tortilla testing.
Bon estimates about 1,000 tortillas are produced each month at the lab. A lot of trial and error is involved, but it's all part of the process in understanding what consumers want and meeting their demands.
We prepare the dough and we divide and roll each piece, and then each piece goes, it's rested a little bit, and each piece goes to a hot press. So without the hot press, if you just press it, especially tortilla, which requires harder or stronger gluten, that when you press it, the dough bounces back. So the hot press, you just keep the shape. So, and then the finished baking.
How quick is the process from beginning to end?
Probably less than a minute.
We have to change belt speeds a little bit depending on the dough and how it handles.
Dr. Jane Bach, the WMC's technical director, says one of the things they're particularly concerned about is making sure the wheat varieties they test maintain the quality standards already put into place, or even push the bar higher. It's necessary in sustaining the export market and making sure farmers in Nebraska and elsewhere are growing wheat the world wants to buy.
Even though we are in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of grain from Nebraska gets exported through our ports. And so we want to make sure that we're staying on top of what's happening in Nebraska and trying to do what we can to improve the wheat quality coming out of Nebraska for the export market, to make sure that the demand is always there, that we can justify the higher price that we can get in the export market, and we just maintain those relationships with our overseas customers.
The American wheat farmer is known for growing the best wheat in the world, and that's a message that we help get out to our customers. Nebraska exports wheat both through the Pacific Northwest and the Gulf, but the main message that we're getting out is that the quality wheat that the U.S. grows is in high demand, and we want to keep that demand by encouraging growers to continue to grow the quality wheat.
Bon also told me that he understands a farmer's main concern is yield, but that quality should be a very close second. He also says he hopes Nebraska can grow more hard white winter wheat each year, so more testing can be done on it. If you'd like to learn more about the Wheat Marketing Center, we've got their information on the Market Journal website. That's going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, we'll talk with policy expert Brad Lubin about the presidential race and the part agriculture is playing in it. Plus, we'll have new information on land values and cash rental rates. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.